So, very good. Okay, so we will begin with 20 minutes of meditation. I will guide this for about half the time, and then I will just let you have some quiet time to meditate without my voice interrupting. So we begin by establishing a comfortable posture that supports our practice, supports us being relaxed as well as alert. So we don't want to be too relaxed and we don't want to be too alert. So balance the middle way. And you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze if it's more comfortable for you. There's certainly no need to look at the screen when you're meditating. It's actually a nice break from screens. And so then just becoming aware of the body, feeling how you're holding your body. And releasing any areas of tension or tightness, relaxing the face, the jaw, releasing the shoulders, softening the belly, and just having a sense of letting go through the body, almost as if you're being drawn down to the earth. And with that release, there's this contrasting brightness of attention, interest, feeling the breath, the life of the body. We can tune into the body as a field of energy. When we become sensitive on this level, we see that there are sensations all through the body, many quite subtle, but all of it the expression of life, the nervous system, and so feeling the breath rising and falling, chest, belly, a touch of air at the nostrils. The breath is a helpful concentration object, something that's always moving, it's always there, even when it becomes quite subtle. And there's also the felt experience, the mood or the feeling tone present in each moment, also quite subtle. Start to be aware of how the feelings and the mood can influence the thinking. So as our mindfulness and concentration increase, this interaction becomes more evident. And this can help us to let go of the thoughts or of any resistance to the feelings. Just seeing that there's a process that's always in motion, that's unfolding, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not so pleasant, sometimes neither one, just neutral. And as we observe closely, it's natural settling that happens along with that. Another kind of interaction between the effort to be aware and the increasing level of focus or concentration. We're not forcing this, trying to make something happen, but there can be a quite natural deepening if we simply become interested in what we are observing, interested in the breath, interested in our feelings, interested in how thoughts become conditioned by feelings and feelings become conditioned by thoughts. This observing isn't a thinking about or an analyzing, and the breath is still there as part of our awareness. The breath tends to hold us to the present moment. And trying to stay alert even as we become relaxed can sometimes be difficult. The calming energy in the early evening can kind of sweep us away to a dull state. This is where maintaining the posture can help us if you find that you're completely lost in thought, to very intentionally come back, start again. You might want to just acknowledge that thought, see where you were, but then just return, reconnect with the breath. Right. I apologize if that was not the most inspired guided meditation I've ever done. I don't know. It's one of those things that, who's to judge? That sticky cough drop on my fingers now. Okay, so I'm trying to frame this a little bit. So I've talked a bit about how I've been working on writing about the Anapanasati Sutta, which is Anapanasati means mindfulness of breathing in and breathing out. So mindful breathing sutta. And it has 16 steps to it, divided into 4 sections, which parallel the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So there's a section that starts with body, generally, and then feeling, and then mental states or mind states, and then insights, I would say. That's the easiest way to characterize it. Those are 4 areas of reflection or attention of mindfulness. And in the Anapanasati Sutta, the way the Buddha gives the instruction, he says to be aware of something as you're breathing. So I'm in the feeling section, which is and I'm on the 7th, or the 3rd of the feeling section, which winds up being the 7th of the 16. I know I don't expect you to remember all this, but I mentioned something in this part about it being the 7th step. I don't want you to get confused with the 7 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I've been struggling over writing about this particular section, because and one of the things I've done as I've been writing about this is I've been reading other books about the Anapanasati Sutta and kind of having a conversation in my writing with these other teachers, Venerable Analayo and Buddhadasa Bhikkhu and Thich Nhat Hanh and Ajahn Pasano, as well as Bhikkhu Bodhi. But there's an agreement, there seems to be an agreement among all of these, that when the Buddha, this step is about experiencing mental activity, and the agreement, it seems that this term mental activity refers to 2 particular aspects of our mental activity, and this is where it gets a little deep, I'll say. So they are, in Pali, Vedana and Sanya. And Vedana is the felt experience, the feeling tone. And I'll talk more about that. It's something many of you have heard me talk about before, but the feeling tone. And then Sanya is perception, which is the naming aspect of the mind, which is largely based on memory. Like, we name things because we know that we've seen them before, right? That's how we know they name things. So Vedana is the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral aspect of every sense impression. So every time you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, or think something, each of those things is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Fun fact, most experiences are neutral, or we'd be overwhelmed with the input. So that's why we're able to kind of go through our day getting, 6 sense impressions constantly, and yet not being overwhelmed, because, like right now, I'm not really smelling anything, and my senses, my body sensation, there isn't a lot going on. It's just fairly neutral. Sounds, the sound of my voice, maybe it's pleasant or unpleasant, and so you see that a lot of things are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But the critical ones are the pleasant and the unpleasant, because the pleasant ones trigger craving, the unpleasant ones trigger aversion. And those are the paths to suffering. And this experience of Vedana is largely below our consciousness. It's very hard to pick up because it happens so fast and it leads to other stuff so quickly. Like before you know it, the smell, the pleasant smell of the bakery has excited a craving, and you might even have walked in the door before you even really knew, had a chance to go, oh, wait a minute, I'm not eating carbs right now or something, like it sort of takes over your consciousness before you even know it's happening. So that part I understand, but how that's connected to naming was something I've been kind of sorting through. The point, I think, is that there's a sense impression that you immediately, you don't just name it, but you actually kind of give it a sense of importance or like you have a belief about it. And the next thing you know, you're thinking about it. Or you're acting on it. And so in this step, what's happening in the sutta is the Buddha saying, if you want to stop suffering, you need to see more clearly this process by which this happens. Now, I think that all of us as meditators are somewhat familiar with how we create suffering in our mind. Because if you watch your thoughts and you notice your thoughts and you come back to breath over and over, you start to see, oh, like when I'm thinking, it's really like gets me agitated. And that's why we try to let go of our thoughts. It's one of the reasons, because it's like, oh, it feels so much better when I get off that thought train. So I think we have generally a sense of this, which I would call an insight, that, oh, when I'm on those thought trains, I create suffering for myself. When I let them go, I feel better. And that's a lot of what motivates us in our meditation, right? And it's one of the reasons, like, we're trying to let go of our thoughts when we're meditating, because we know, like, oh, this just keeps getting me into these different sort of cul-de-sacs of the mind. But this particular reflection, then, I think it kind of brings us in a little closer to this process. So I'm going to read to you what I wrote today. And I've been thinking about this for maybe weeks. I've written a bunch on this section that I was not happy with. And so I was like in this kind of turmoil about it, speaking of thought trains, and kind of sorting it through and working on it. And I knew that I was going to have to sit down and just like let it come out, what I've been processing over the last few days. So this is what I came up with. So first of all, I'll read you the step, this 7th step in the Anapanasati Sutta, where the Buddha says, one trains experiencing mental activity, I breathe in. One trains experiencing mental activity, I breathe out. And there you are. There's the breath, and then there's paying attention to the mental activity. The path of Buddhist meditation is sometimes boiled down to the development of calm and insight, concentration and wisdom. While this might sound like a simple formula, to understand its unfolding takes time and a great deal of experience. For myself, when I first experienced calm and concentration, I felt I'd arrived. I was 10 days into a 3-week retreat and had been struggling with all the typical challenges of a meditation retreat: restlessness, pain, floods of thought, and difficult emotions. Suddenly, or so it seemed, One afternoon, a pleasant stillness seemed to descend over me in the meditation hall. I thought, this is what I've been talking about. This is what they've been talking about. This is real meditation. But I was wrong. This was only one aspect, though an important one, of real meditation. The insight element, the understanding of what was happening and how it happened, were missing. I know I'm not alone in my pursuit of calm and quiet in my meditation practice. As a meditation teacher, I regularly encounter people's craving to stop thinking. Many of the questions people ask about meditation are about how to calm the mind. And there's no doubt that calming the mind is an important part of practice. Just look at the next step in the Anapanasati Sutta. The next step says calming the mental activity. So when I breathe in, calming the mental activity, breathe out, calming mental activity. However, the pursuit of calm as an endpoint can short circuit the ultimate purpose of practice. When people bring up the question of how to stop thoughts, the standard answer I give is, we aren't trying to stop our thoughts. We are trying to change our relationship to them. What is that relationship? Firstly, I would say that we believe our thoughts, but even more fundamentally, until we embark on some kind of inner exploration, we don't even consider the fact that we are thinking. They are just a part of the landscape of our lives, like our dog or our clothes. Once we discover that we have a relationship to them, we realize we can't control them. And so our meditation practice begins. The two aspects, calm and insight, can develop side by side. For many people, there needs to be a certain amount of calm in order to see clearly and develop insight. It's easy to see how the Anapanasati helps in this process. And of course, we're far into this writing about the Anapanasati, so it would have been easier if you've read this possible book. It would be easy to see. In this current step, we arrive at a deeper element of insight exploration. What we look at in this step is how thoughts are constructed. Specifically, the experts tell us that what the Buddha means by mental activity or mental formations is a combination of feeling, Vedana, and perception, Sanya, the naming quality of the mind. In order to see how these two factors of mind lay the groundwork for the arising of thoughts, the mind needs to be pretty quiet. Thus the need for concentration and calm. What we see when we look at this process is that a feeling is of one of the three types: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. What we see when we look at this process is that a feeling of one of the three types, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, arises and is immediately categorized or named. This process happens so fast that it's rare that we can actually see it happen. Rather, we typically see its results, the arising of a thought or an impulse to act. If we pay attention, though, we can see that the impulse has these two factors feeding it. You can hear a car horn, unpleasant Vedana, and know what it is and what it represents, perception, Sanya, and you jump out of the way, understanding that you are in danger. Or you walk past a bakery and smell fresh bread, pleasant Vedana, recognize that it is bread, perception, and think, I need to pick up a loaf of bread for dinner. All of this happens so fast that you don't ordinarily see it playing out. In meditation, however, especially a concentrated meditation, we can begin to catch some or all of the elements of this process. But what is the point? Why do I need to do this? What's being revealed when we have insight into the unfolding of thought is that our thoughts are constructions built out of these different elements. Without this insight, our thoughts seem to be something like information or facts that are delivered to our consciousness, unquestioned, believed, accepted as truth. Because much of the time our thoughts are actually driven by desire and aversion, they lead not to satisfaction or solutions, but to dukkha. It is this truth that our meditation practice is supposed to help us see and eventually reverse. When we see the constructed nature of thought, it helps us to break free of our tendency to believe everything we think. This then means that we are questioning our thoughts, looking into them to see what truth they may or may not hold. Further, we see underneath all of this is not just a belief in individual thoughts, but a belief in I, me, mine. This belief comes out of the illusion that's created by the streams of thoughts, memories, feelings, perceptions, and sense impressions that pass through consciousness. All these experiences seem connected to something, some abiding central processing unit, to borrow a computer term. But when we can break down these experiences into their component parts, we see that they are actually discrete, though interrelated elements. There is no center, no self, or I running the show or holding everything together, some thread or through line. It's just a constant flow. Thus, the insight into impermanence helps us to see that there is no solid self. Here in step 7, we are in the process of deconstruction, a process that is integral to the work of mindfulness. When we look at the Anapanasati Sutta, we can see it as a process of exploring more and more subtle elements of experience until we get down to the root forces. The first tetrad engages the grossest form of our existence, our body and senses. The second tetrad moves to the more subtle aspect of the felt experience, Vedana, which still holds a connection to the body. The third tetrad, as we'll see, addresses the mind itself, leaving the gross and even subtle elements of body and feelings behind. Finally, the fourth tetrad turns toward the processes behind body, feeling, and mind. Here in step 7, we are, in a sense, at a crossroads where insight becomes more prominent in the process. What is revealed in experiencing mental activity is key to moving forward. While the earlier steps have potential for revealing insights, it is easy to practice them with a sole focus of calming the body and concentrating the mind. In turning toward mental activity, we are explicitly examining the process by which suffering arises, the first step in the Buddhist quest to find freedom. In a sense, we are following in his footsteps, treading through the same territory that he uncovered 2,600 years ago. So that's something. Oh, thanks, Vicky. I knew you'd appreciate it. Vicky just came back from a 6-week retreat, if you don't mind me revealing that to the group. So she's been actually doing this, not just thinking about it. But this is where, people often get to a point in their practice where they've been meditating for a while, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait, why am I doing this? Like, what is supposed to happen? Because, when we come to meditation, it's typically we have some sort of vague idea, like it's a good thing to do, like it'll help me. And, then we have some other probably specific things, like it's going to make me more calm or give me some wisdom or spiritual insight or something. But then you get into the kind of just grind of sitting in, breath out, breath, thinking, breath, thought, body, sensations, noise, dogs barking, rah, 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 your grocery list, in, out. And, you feel okay. I mean, it doesn't hurt, you feel better when you meditate stuff, but it can sort of be like, well, yeah, but where's the insight? What is it that I'm trying to do here? What am I learning? And so, I usually like to take people through the Four Noble Truths and talk about, well, what you're doing is you're seeing suffering and you're seeing how it arises in the mind. When you, in a very simple sense, I'll just say, when you're thinking, that there's more tension in the body, and that when you stop thinking, you let go. So that's the first noble truth, is there's suffering. The second noble truth is, oh, it's caused by this craving, by this thinking. Third noble truth is it ends when I stop thinking. And the fourth noble truth is the path, all the tools for that, the Eightfold Path that helps us to let go, to do all that. And I like to point out to people that you're already doing that, right? You already sort of know that. I mean, the first thing we kind of learn, and I think many of us apply to our lives, even beyond meditation, is like, oh, when I get caught up in my thinking, it really stresses me out. I need to just stop and breathe, right? Like that's like a very common understanding. And actually, it's a really powerful insight, it's a transformative insight in and of itself. It's like realizing, oh, drinking, I have to stop drinking. It's like I have to stop thinking. And of course, we don't stop thinking, but I have to change my relationship to my thoughts and not be so caught up in them. So I think it's important then at a certain point in our practice to kind of see that, oh, like how does this work? What is really happening? And what's the benefit of this beyond just like, getting stress reduction or whatever? So, but this particular piece I was just reading is then getting into an even deeper like look at least it's an attempt to get deeper into looking at how that unfolds in terms of seeing the suffering, seeing how we create the suffering. And, just realizing that our thoughts are a construction can change how we move through the world. And indeed, I'd say that for serious meditators, it is kind of a key thing that we take with us and that we question, and so we start to talk about our thoughts and our judgments and our beliefs in much more relative ways. Like we don't sort of tend to make the same absolute statements. We start to see how much our conditioning and our biases influence what we think and what we believe. And so all of that really, this deconstruction that I talked about, really starts to, this is actually how you free yourself. Because what is it that makes us not be free? The thing that makes us not be free is that we are driven by, when we are driven by unseen forces, the unseen forces of craving and aversion, the unseen forces of judgment, anger, addiction. This is what the lack of freedom. I don't like the word slavery. I don't want to use that word, but the lack of freedom means for a Buddhist that we are being driven by and controlled by these conditioned habits and underlying tendencies. And so freedom is letting go of them and being less attached to them. We know this, and yet we can kind of get lost. Well, what is I'm attached to my car? No, that's not really the important thing. It's your attachment to your beliefs and your viewpoint and your idea about self and what you have to have and what you can't tolerate. And all of these are the attachments that cause us true suffering. So I just, think it's important to come back to this from time to time as a reminder of what we're doing and how this works. Because again, we can sort of wonder like, well, does it help? Am I, is anything really changing? Am I a better person now that I meditate? What really is happening? But I think when we look at it in this way, we see that we really have changed. I think most of us who practice and and I've done, particularly if you've done some retreats and that you've seen these things and understand them at least on an intuitive level, and they do start to really create a kind of a new way of being in the world, and create a different kind of foundation to your way of viewing and interacting with the world and with people. So I think that's certainly, enough from me. And there's a little time if anybody wants to ask a question or chime in, corrections. We're a small group tonight, so everybody can, well, I'm not going to say everybody's going to have time to share, but, you are certainly, maybe you're a person who usually feels like, oh, there's so many people here, I don't want to be the one to talk. Maybe tonight is the time when you should talk, or could talk. Or not.
I'll chime in. Hey, Kevin.
Hi, Mike.
Yeah, you kind of hit on something that has been bouncing around in my head kind of recently about where I'm going with meditation and what am I accomplishing. And I've been doing it coming up on 4 years, and I think the first couple of years were a little bit of this, like what you called the spiritual grunt work, just
Mm-hmm.
kind of learning how to calm the body and how to calm the mind. And maybe in the last, I don't know, half a year, seems like I've been thinking about this and wondering what's going on, and it feels like I've kind of hit that phase where I was trying to describe it the other day when I was leading a meditation, where it's like you do the calming the body and then you calm the mind by focusing on the breath, and then you kind of hit this other phase where your thoughts are less sticky and it's almost things are happening, and it's kind of where you get to this point where I feel like you're getting to know your mind better and you're seeing these processes and where your mind likes to go all the time, and I kind of related that to what you were talking about understanding kind of some of these thought processes, and I this is a little more vague than what you were saying, but I guess I related to where we're going with it, and what's the end result besides just being calmer and more spiritual. And I think I've said enough here.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's that self-examination, and it's partly by turning thoughts into objects, things that we can actually step away from and view, rather than as subject, like I am my thoughts. When we can step back and see, oh, these habit patterns, and yeah, I tend to go to these places. It's not that you're going to necessarily stop having those thoughts, but they're not going to be as so consuming. They don't have the same power. They're seen for what they are. It's just like rambling, energetic.
Yeah, it's really
Whatever.
transformative when you start thinking these thoughts. And they're not me; they're just thoughts.
Yeah, yeah.
And you kind of get a different viewpoint. It's like taking off the blinders a little bit, and it's like, oh, there's my brain running off in this direction again. Okay, go ahead. I'll be
Yeah.
here when you come back.
Yeah, and they also, and then we really can at times, when you're having a conversation and you're like, you have a thought, and you kind of say like, well, to yourself before you speak, like, is this true? Like, this is my impulse to say this, but where is it coming from? Like, what is it? I was having a conversation earlier today with someone, and I could feel my own emotional energy getting stirred up, and then sort of starting to go into this kind of, judgmental, aversive kind of view. And I was like, okay, maybe I don't need to do that. Or maybe I at least need to say, I know it's very judgmental, or I don't know if this is really true, or, whatever, kind of frame it a little bit as like, well, this is just what's coming up. But, it's not sure, just to be honest about that, and yeah, to have, as you said, be a little less sticky so that I don't have to identify with it. I don't have to say it if it's not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're not necessarily true, and they're not me. They're just thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me ask you, when you were talking about the Sanya and the Vedana, were you saying those are the constructs, or the building blocks of thoughts, or those are coming from our thoughts?
No, they are constructs. They come before. What I would call thoughts are words and images in the mind, and so and their thoughts are conscious to a great extent. Conscious. We sort of know we're having them even when we're not paying attention to them. But Vedana and Sanya, feeling and perception, we don't really know that we're having them. So they're pre-verbal. And yeah. So they are they are building blocks for thoughts. And we could, or maybe it's better to say they are the things that trigger thoughts in a way. It's not necessarily that the thoughts are, that they are parts of thoughts, but rather, it starts with a feeling and a perception. And then the next thing that arises out of that movement of mind is a full-blown idea, verbal or imagistic idea in the mind.
Which can then trigger more feelings and more.
Well, this is where it gets incredibly complicated, right? You start to break it down as if there were just like one thing, and then there's a thought. That's not the way it actually works, because there's this constant swirl and feedback loop going on. So, because in another sense, it's like you could think of it as like there are layers happening. There's constant Vedana happening. There's constant perception happening. And then there's, more or less constant thoughts happening. And they're just like feeding each other. And this is why it's so different when you go on a meditation retreat. The first couple days, it's like chaos, right? Because I'm not doing anything. I'm stopping and I'm just trying to settle everything. And instead, everything is still just moving at that full speed in this feedback loop. And I have to just grind it out, keep coming back to the breath I have to keep interrupting the feedback loop over and over until it finally loses its generative power. And then there starts to be little bits more space. It's more like, instead of streams, it's more like blips, There's Vedana, then it goes, Vedana, there's perception, thought, and then there's space around it. And then, we get much more concentrated, and then we're able to see it all more, because when there's space around it, of course, it's easier to isolate individual moments. Whew.
Getting complicated.
Wearing myself out here.
Thanks.
But fun. I mean, obviously, I think it's fun to talk about and think about it, and just that kind of, trying to characterize it like that, I think is kind of fun. I don't know. Because it's like I'm always interested in. I'm very interested in, like, how, like, how does this work? What's going on? And because this whole thing we're talking about, the mind, it's not a solid thing, and there is no mechanical process going on. So we're trying to like peer in and catch stuff and like, wait, okay, there seems to be this, and to kind of, to understand it. Obviously this is what the Buddha was a genius at, was for him to be able to isolate all these different factors of mind. It was part of his genius. Certainly, to me, a significant part of his genius.
Kevin, this is Anne. I think it's, I don't know, ironic or whatever you want to call it, that you spoke about thoughts and that kind of stuff this evening, because this morning when I read your daily reflections book, that was the subject. And how we think of thoughts and even our breath and feelings and stuff as my thoughts, my feelings, that kind of stuff. And we need to shift our perception to see that they're only the thoughts, the feelings, whatever, instead of mine. And you mentioned that we're kind of conditioned over time to label those thoughts. We're conditioned to attach a word or something to it. And by letting go of those, it kind of frees us of, quote, the bondage of self. And so by doing this, it gives you a beginning of understanding more non-self. Yeah, I thought that was kind of,
well, there you go. Good.
Yeah.
Good timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, this I'm glad you brought it back to a recovery concept, because it certainly is directly connected to that, the bondage of self. It's actually a really good way of thinking of it. And this is another reason why sometimes the recovery language and 12-step language gives us some interesting ways into talking about Buddhism, because the thinking of the bondage of self that we're trying to let go of, rather than like sometimes in the Buddhist world, it can kind of be like, well, what's so bad about a self? Or I'm not supposed to have a self. And whereas in AA, it's like, it's just screwing up your life, your relationship, your ego. Oh, okay. Well, that's a good reason to want to let go, not just to be spiritual or something.
And I think it's very interesting how Buddhism and Buddhist, Dharma is so closely related to some of the concepts of 12-step programs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, Vimalasara says Buddhism was the first treatment program, the original treatment program.
Well, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. He's describing the same process, and it just points to how really in some ways very natural addiction is. It's just that it's an extreme version of a natural human process of clinging and acting out of pleasant Vedana. Oh, I want some more. That's just a natural human process. It's fundamental to Buddhist teachings, and it's of course the cause of addiction. So it just there's no real distinction. You don't have to come up with a different version of Buddhism to get to addiction.
Yeah, I'm in an IOP program right now in San Diego, and I started out in the dual diagnosis program, and now they said I was done there and I need to move on to the senior program. Well, I didn't want to go there at first because they don't cover addiction. And plus the fact, I told them I can't go there. I'm not a senior. And so anyway, so, the senior program is more concentrated on mental illness and the causes and stuff, but we do still discuss a lot of the things, the concepts that were in the dual diagnosis program. And yeah, it's very interesting. And now what I do whenever we have a break, the dual diagnosis program is kind of on the same schedule as the senior program, but during breaks, I always go back to dual because I want to get to know the newcomers and tell them, this program works if you work it, stick to it,
Yeah. I always found it, when I first was exposed to the idea of dual diagnosis, I was like, you mean there's people that don't have have at least two problems? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, and sometimes if people in dual, the newcomers and stuff, ask me what my drug of choice was, and my answer is more.
Yeah. Very, very good. Yeah. Well, I think I will let folks go. Just leave you with the suggestion to see the conditioned and constructed nature of your thoughts and beliefs. Them something to take with you over these next few days as a reflection, and be kind to yourself, starting with yourself. And then it's okay to be kind to other people, but start with yourself. All right, you guys.